At number 4, we have Halloween. Bet you thought this would be number 1, as I'm a huge Carpenter fan, but that would be too predictable. And in any case, despite the title, it's not the number 1 film that makes me think of Halloween. Might be for you, but not for me. So guess when the film takes place. The movie takes place during Halloween and focuses on an escaped mental patient called Michael Myers. Myers is the classic psycho killer and returns to the street he grew up on, the street where he previously killed his sister as a child. Myers begins systematically exterminating the teenage kids on the street as they go trick-or-treating. At the same time, Myers' psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis, played by Donald Pleasence, obsessively attempts to track him down before he can kill again. The film culminates in Myers' struggle with a teenage babysitter played by Jamie Lee Curtis. Much like The Exorcist, so much has been written about this film. The reason for this is that Halloween was a low-budget independent film at the time and went on to make an absolute fortune at the box office. Hollywood studios and filmmakers really wanted to, replicate the amount of money and the success that Halloween had had. We still see this trend of making low-budget horror movies such as Blair Witch or the Spanish film Wreck that easily make their money back because they're made for very little. There's a saying in Hollywood which is that a horror film always makes a profit. I don't think that's technically true, but in any genre, it's probably as close as it will come. It was John Carpenter's first professional film and catapulted him into the limelight. If you want to know more about Carpenter and his other works, check out the top 10 John Carpenter films list I made a while back on this account. Like The Exorcist, this film is widely regarded as one of the best horror movies ever made. And it really is. The film is so simple. It takes the ideas of films like Psycho and presents a stalker hunting down his prey with an element of mystery to the antagonist. It takes the old haunted house film genre and gives it a more human element, resulting in a fantastic third act. This film, while giving birth to the modern day slasher movie, isn't actually like a modern day slasher movie. There is very little gore, and the film quite rightly takes its time building up the characters and alluding to the coming storm of Myers. And when Myers does arrive, he really arrives. The cast is fantastic, especially Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasence, who's just great in anything he was in. And the cinematography and lighting in certain scenes are a joy to watch. What makes this film so good is the old adage, less is more. It may feel tame by modern slasher film standards, but really, in my opinion, it has them all beat. This is the daddy of the slasher films, and it gets shown every Halloween without fail. The film has spawned many sequels and a Rob Zombie remake, but really the first one is by far the best, although I think Halloween 2 is actually pretty good, and it was written by Carpenter and Deborah Hill. The others are pretty hit and miss, but always worth a watch, even if they are pretty cheesy at times. But, in amongst them there are some really good moments. Special mention should go to Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, that had nothing to do with Michael Myers, and tried to create the idea of Halloween movies being one-off stories. It's an interesting but very weird flick, but, it was a very brave decision at the time to make that film. Not much more I can say without this becoming an in-depth analysis of the film or the series. All the Halloween films are entertaining, but really the first is a classic, and Michael Myers and his dodgy Bill Shatner mask, yes, that is what it is still a very creepy sight on Halloween. Oh yeah, and Carpenter's score is just incredible. Now number 3 is a bit of a cheat, as there are a whole bunch of films here, but let me explain. There's a subgenre in horror called the horror anthology. Now these films are like buying a really great collection of short stories or a really cool DVD box set of your favourite TV show. Typically, there is an overall arc in which 3 or more different horror stories are told. One of the most famous horror anthology films ever made is called The Creepshow, and it really makes me think of Halloween. The film is directed by George Romero and written by Stephen King, a real collaboration of horror royalty. The film is a tribute to the old Tales from the Crypt horror comics of the 1950s. The story follows a kid who is visited by a skeleton wraith, which takes him through the stories in the comic. This plays out to a backdrop of a dominating father who throws his comics out into the garbage. The stories are all excellent in this film, from zombie relatives coming back for revenge, to a creature that has been caged in a basement for 200 years, to the adulterous couple who return after being murdered by a jealous lover to seek out their killer. It's all great stuff, and the stories are cleverly intertwined with some nice animation, giving it that feeling of being a comic. I always watched this film when I was a kid, and especially at Halloween. Although fantastic, I have to also talk about some of the other horror anthology films that I loved to watch at that time of year. There are many horror anthologies, but the best ones were made by a film company called Amicus in the 60s and 70s, before the company unfortunately went bust. A lot of people don't know about these movies, but really, some of them are great horror flicks. Dr. Terror's House of Horror is probably the one film that sticks in my mind the most. Here, a group of 5 male passengers share a train carriage. They are joined by a sixth passenger who proceeds to read their fortunes using tarot cards. Each story of their fortune is of a supernatural nature. There's a good twist at the end of this one, and seeing Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Donald Sutherland in the same film together was fantastic. Another brilliant anthology film from Amicus was From Beyond the Grave. It starred Peter Cushing as an antique dealer who runs a shop with items you cannot resist. The short stories within the film follow the people who steal from the antiques dealer certain items that lead to a terrible fate. The story of the antique door that opens into a room that time has forgot, yet something is living in there, still sends shivers down my spine. Amicus did a few other horror anthologies that are all great fun to watch, but the last horror anthology film I'd like to mention is called The Monster Club. Now, most of this film is okay, but there is one story that stands out, that of a Hollywood film director who gets stranded in a ghoul-infested English village at night. Really worth watching and a great story, very eerie. Plus, the film has Vincent Price in it. Can't really complain about that, can we? So the reason I lump these films together is that I feel they're all part of the one collection, like an omnibus of ghost stories you read on a winter's night, and they really make me think about Halloween, even if it's not when I watch them. Some of these are hard to find, and most of them aren't terrifying, but they are just solid horror films with great storytelling that give you a lot for your money's worth. So check them out.